Everyone, and welcome to Carolina Breast Friends YouTube channel. We're glad that you're here. Carolina Breast Friends is a nonprofit located in Charlotte, North Carolina, and our mission is to encourage and support those in the breast cancer community in a positive environment. And tonight we are thrilled to have Pat Fogarty. She is the outpatient oncology, wellness, and nutrition therapy dietitian at Levine Cancer Institute in Charlotte, North Carolina. Thanks so much for being with us tonight, Pat.
My pleasure.
And I am looking forward to this session. We are going to be focusing on vitamins, truth versus myth. There is so much information out there, and it's really hard to know what is best for us. So I'm looking forward to your advice.
Sure. Well, thank you. And I do appreciate the opportunity to talk to everybody and welcome. And all of us over at Levine Cancer Institute welcome you as well. And we hope that you can join us for some of our classes. I just want to mention that I put together a lot of information for this, but, please remember that, all the guidance we give you will never replace your one-on-one with your healthcare professional. So always make sure you check before you start doing anything new, and that includes vitamins and herbs and things like that. So our focus tonight is going to be on the vitamins and the minerals, because this is something that a lot of people are taking, and I think sometimes a little misguided, and especially as we move into the cold weather. We're almost into the flu season, and a lot of people jump on the bandwagon and they run to the GNC and they load up on things, and some of those things they may really not need. So let me share my screen and we'll get going. And please don't be shy about asking questions. Feel free to jump in. I'll try to check the chat. I don't know if I can do it while I'm looking at everything else on the screen, but I'll do my best. And in case you see any Carrie in the chat, feel free to chime in and let me know in case I'm not picking up on it. But it's interesting because vitamins and minerals, most people think, just like medications, that they're going to be something that's very regulated, but it is very much an unregulated field. And so this is really where buyer beware fits in, because we have to be careful, because the companies can often say whatever they want and put a little disclaimer on there that whatever they're claiming hasn't really been proven yet, but they still put their claims on there. There are certain claims they're allowed to say, but sometimes they'll push the envelope a little bit in terms of giving you the impression that something may be more helpful than it really is. And we know in the United States, 4 out of 5 of us are taking something. And so it's either just a multivitamin, like something that might have some B vitamins and vitamin C and vitamin D, and maybe some minerals in it, like calcium or magnesium. And it adds up to the tune of about $50 billion a year. So this is an enormous amount of money we're spending on these things. And sometimes people joke around and they say that Americans have the most expensive urine in the world, because many times these things just come in and now they're going out, as we go to the bathroom. So sometimes these things aren't very useful, especially if we're already eating a healthy diet. So we're going to look at all these things tonight. And about 4 out of 5 people, like I said, are taking a vitamin, but only about 24% of them actually have what's called a deficiency, which means that you're low in something and the doctor has documented it. So maybe when you were a teenager, maybe your iron was low and you had an iron deficiency, or maybe during pregnancy, you needed more folic acid, to help with the production of a healthy baby. But the rest of those folks may or may not need these vitamins. So let's talk about the research for a minute. And I wish I could say it's straightforward, but you have to remember a few things. When we're talking about research done with vitamins, many times it's done on what we call a recall, or the person remembering that they took a vitamin, and they include that in the study. And then maybe later on you see something on the news that says, people who take multivitamins have better skin or better bone health or something like that. And it's tricky to compare studies because many times they don't really ask the people what was in your supplement. And you probably realize this, but vitamins can differ as much as breakfast cereals differ. So you can picture going down that breakfast aisle and there's about 50 different types of cereal. Same thing with even a multivitamin. There are many different formulations. So if you have a multivitamin in your house, I'm going to give you a couple of tips about what to look at later to see if it's a good one or not. I mentioned to Carrie too that I really love Consumer Laboratories. They have a wonderful website and they have a subscription service. And several times a year, they're testing different vitamins to make sure they have what they claim to. And then also, do they dissolve? And they also have very good information. So if you're looking for a really good website to remember, Consumer Laboratories is a very good one. So a new study came out to say that multivitamins seem to be improving brain function in seniors. So many times seniors will run out and get it. But part of the challenge too is that, we eat very differently from each other. And also, even in the last 30 years, what we eat now is so different. So the bottom line is we really want to make sure we're getting most of our good nutrition from our food. If we can use a multivitamin, maybe sort of as an insurance policy once in a while, that's fine. But the most important thing I want you to remember is that eating well really is the basis for good health, because there are always special things that are in fruits and vegetables and whole grains that are going to help your body use the vitamins and minerals. And the fiber that's in those wonderful plant foods are what's feeding all those trillions of good bacteria that are in our intestines. And they are really doing a great job in helping our immune system. So the bottom line is that it's really important to make sure we're eating well. I've listed a few common deficiencies. If you can see the screen here, some of the most common ones in the US would be things like iron, vitamin D, vitamin E, calcium, magnesium, potassium. The omega-3 fats, you might have heard about those. Sometimes they call them heart-healthy fats. And when they come from fish, they're referred to as fish oils. So those are some common ones. And there are certain groups of people that are more likely to be low in vitamins. So you think about someone who may eat a more restrictive diet. So if you're a vegan and you're not eating any animal products, so you're not having meat or fish, or you're not even having any dairy or eggs like a vegetarian would, then sometimes they can run into problems with not getting enough vitamin D, some iron, calcium, zinc, those sorts of things. As I mentioned before, when women are menstruating, they lose iron every month when they have blood loss. So they need more iron. This is one thing you'll notice if you pick up a senior vitamin, like I'm taking now because I'm old. So when I look at my senior multi, I'll notice compared to one just for general adults, it's going to have less iron, because when we don't have our menstrual cycle anymore, we don't need as much iron. So you'll notice differences in different types of vitamins. And by the way, anything that I show you, there are many good things out there. These are just examples, okay? And I don't get money from any food company or any vitamin supplement company. Also, too, sometimes when people have intestinal diseases like Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis, they really may not absorb their nutrients very well. People have had surgery to their GI tract. So if someone's had like gastrointestinal surgery, or even if someone's had bypass, like if they're trying to lose a lot of weight and they go through gastric bypass, sometimes they may run into deficiencies too. And then, of course, if someone has an eating disorder where they're really restricting their food, that can affect vitamins. And then lastly, medications. Okay, so this is where I'd like you to talk to your pharmacist next time you're, at the pharmacy, and say, hey, would you mind checking my medications and see if there's any vitamin or mineral that might be affected by this medicine. This is particularly true if you're on a medicine for a very long time. And when we talk about like acid reducing medicines, what they call PPIs, sometimes when people take them for years and years and years, they can run into lower B12 levels. And so this is why I always say to people, it's a good idea to make friends with your pharmacist and, ask them, is there anything I should be making sure I'm getting in my diet? Or, should I be taking a multivitamin? The other thing, though, is that sometimes people are taking way too much. And I see this all the time with some of our survivors who think that they need to load up on high doses of vitamins. What they don't realize is that sometimes those medications can interact with each other. This is especially true with minerals. So sometimes if you take too much calcium or too much zinc, they can interfere with each other. Even vitamin C, sometimes people load up on vitamin C during cold season, and they don't realize that if they keep taking a very high dose of vitamin C, it can lower their copper. which is very important for making blood cells. So there's sort of a delicate balance our bodies have. And so we need to respect that and be careful and not overdo it. So at the end of this presentation, I have some very practical things about which type of vitamin you should look for. But I just want to point that out right at the beginning. Also, I haven't put it in these flyers, but if any of you are in treatment right now and you're getting radiation or chemotherapy, they really don't recommend that you take a lot of what we call antioxidant vitamins. That includes vitamins A, C, and E, and then a couple of minerals, selenium and zinc. And the reason they don't like people taking that when they're in active treatment is that many of the treatments are what we call oxidative. So they want them to be oxidative in the body. And if you take a vitamin or mineral that's an antioxidant, it's not a great idea because you may not make your treatments work quite as well as they should. Most doctors will say it's okay to take a multivitamin. Those amounts are usually fine, but they don't want people loading up on extra vitamins and that sort of thing. So, but always tell your doctor what you're taking and tell them which brand you're taking, because if they want to look at it and see what's in there. I'm always amazed when I meet people in private practice and they haven't told their doctor any of their supplements they're taking or their herbs as well. So that's just a little bit of caution in the beginning here. I wanted to just mention that the easiest way to get all the nutrition you need is eating well. So if you can fill up half of your plate with fruits and vegetables, that's a great way to get a lot of those things that we're going to talk about. Also, to some nice whole grains, things like, pasta that has at least 3 grams of fiber per serving. That's always my guideline for making sure something's got a little more fiber, a little more whole grain to it. If you haven't tried barley, grab a box of that quick cooking barley at the grocery store next time. There's good recipes right on the box. Try some quinoa, some different grains that are really easy to include that will give you some good fiber. And what I'll call phytochemicals, these things that are in all these plant foods that are really good for us. So lean meats and fish can be a great part of your diet too, as well as all the great plant proteins. So things like cooked beans, like black beans and pinto beans. We can do hummus and chickpeas. Also soy foods like, tofu and edamame. Those can be great sources of protein, as well as nuts and seeds. So lots of delicious ways to get good nutrition. So like the bottom line, like I said before, is really eating well is going to give you the best chance of getting all the nutrition you need. And so this is why sometimes doctors will say, well, you don't need a multivitamin if you're eating well. And that's true. But, I'm pretty realistic. And I know there are many days where maybe I'm not getting as much as I need. So once in a while, if you want to do a multivitamin and your doctor says it's okay, that's usually what I'll tell people is probably the safest way to go. And so let's focus on some of the things that are particularly important for the immune system. So these are vitamins that you'll see. And if you have a vitamin supplement handy, you can check and see if these things are in the supplements. When you're looking at your multivitamin, like I said, we're not going over like 100% of what's called the RDAs or the recommended dietary allowances. So we don't want to load up on too much of a dose. But let's talk about vitamin A for a while. And vitamin A is really interesting. It comes in different forms. And there's a fatty form. So sometimes vitamins can be what we call fat soluble or water soluble. So vitamin A is considered a fat soluble vitamin. So this means that if you were to eat an awful lot of it, it's stored in your body. It's stored in that fat. Same with vitamin D, vitamin E, and vitamin K. Those are all the fat soluble vitamins. But vitamin A is really important for helping produce antibodies. It's also really important for all the GI tract and all the cells that line the GI tract. So if you had chemotherapy and you had issues with the GI tract during chemo, this can be a good way to rebuild it and make it work really well. It's also very important for your skin. So if you want nice looking skin, vitamin A sources are very good for you. But you'll notice sometimes on your multivitamin that they break it into like a vitamin A that's the more fatty one, and an OL, or the beta carotene, because the beta carotene is not something that is stored in the body. So that's why sometimes you'll see them in two different forms in the body. But you can get lots of nice vitamin A from things like fatty fish, green leafy vegetables, all those delicious orangey ones. So we're talking about all the pumpkin and the sweet potatoes and the butternut squash that's coming out. In the summertime, we have peaches and peppers. Those are good sources of the carotenoids. Even broccoli is a great source as well. And we also can get some vitamin A from milk and cheeses as well. So we'll see it in many different places. And vitamin A is sometimes added to things. If you're at the grocery store next time, I want you to pick up a box of Total cereal and look and see, and you will notice right on that box that they are putting a ton of vitamins in there. Okay, so if you are someone who eats Total cereal all the time, you certainly wouldn't need to add an extra vitamin on top of it, right? If you're someone who eats Total cereal, takes a multivitamin, and also does like protein shakes where they're adding vitamins to it, you can kind of see how these can all add up very quickly, and you might end up with too many vitamins and minerals. So it's just something to be aware of. In each of these little sections, I've given you information about how much you need. So I actually put what, like the measurements for each of the things. So you can see right here on page 2, the different amounts of vitamin A that are necessary for the body. The kind that's from the vegetables, the carotenoid form and the fruit, that really works better in your body when it's cooked. So this is one instance when cooking some vegetables can be a good thing to get more of the vitamin A form of beta carotene. So when you're cooking tomatoes, it's a good idea to have a little bit of oil in your pan. And so that's what I try to remember when I'm cooking tomatoes and things like that, just to make sure that and butternut squash, they include a little bit of oil because it will help the body absorb it better. Also too, you should always put a little bit of dressing on your salad, because the beta carotene, the vitamin A and the leafy greens, that you really will absorb better if you have a little bit of dressing on it, a little bit of oil. And so having something like a little bit of canola oil or soybean oil can be a good way to get a little bit more out of that vitamin A. One of the things I talk a lot about in this class, and I'm sure the ladies who've been to my classes could do this section for me, but I'm a big fan of canned pumpkin. So especially after Thanksgiving, when it's on sale and you can get it really inexpensively, stock up for the rest of the spring and the winter. But put a little bit of canned pumpkin in your different foods for a way to get vitamin A. And that way will help you get more of this into your diet. I use it with ground up flax seeds and add it to muffin mixes to get a little bit more in terms of the number of muffins, but also more nutrition. Chopped spinach too is a very good source of it as well. And then one of my favorite snacks is those little colorful mini peppers. So those are a wonderful thing to snack on, along with baby carrots. And I usually try to have it with something with a little bit of fat, so maybe a low-fat ranch dressing or a little bit of hummus. And in the summertime, when I go to the beach, I always drink low-sodium tomato juice or V8 juice, because the tomato juice will help with the skin, any exposure to the UV light. It's not going to replace your sunscreen, but it's a good, easy way to do it. Okay, so that's a little bit of information about vitamin A. So on those days when you're trying to really eat well and get more of the vitamins in there, this is a very easy way to do it. Now, vitamin D is really an important one for the immune system. And we know that all the immune system cells in your body have receptors for vitamin D. So that tells us this is really, really important. Believe it or not, your skin makes vitamin D. Okay, when you're out in the sunshine, your skin will get a precursor to vitamin D manufactured right on your skin. And then it goes into your body and gets converted by your liver and your kidneys. So your body makes it. And that also is a signal to me that this is super important. But let's say you're someone who doesn't spend a lot of time in the sun. And so you're trying to be good and you're wearing your sunscreen, which blocks those UV lights from making the vitamin D. This is one thing that people may want to use a multivitamin for, or even a separate vitamin D supplement. There are certainly some people who definitely can be lower than others in vitamin D. Senior citizens, because our skin doesn't make it quite as readily as when we're younger. People who have very dark skin, it doesn't make the vitamin D as readily as pale skin. And then also when someone has a lot of extra weight, the vitamin D doesn't really circulate around the body very well. It gets stored in the fat. And so I always say to people, vitamin D is a good thing to get tested each year when you go for your physical. See how you're doing with it. And if it's low, it's very easy to fix with a supplement. And vitamin D3 is usually the supplement form that's recommended because it's already converted. So your body doesn't have to do too much work. So this is one instance when a supplement may be helpful. We also know that you have to have calcium along with vitamin D and magnesium, all of those three things together to help the bones really do well together and, stay strong as we get older. So this is one instance where you might be taking lots of calcium pills, but if you don't have enough vitamin D in your diet or even magnesium to help the vitamin D work, your bones may not get super strong. So that's something to keep an eye on. Let's see where we can get it in foods. All right. Now, years ago, you might, if any of you are, a little more seasoned than others, you might remember your parents giving you cod liver oil. And that really was for the vitamin D. It also had some vitamin A in it as well. But fatty fish is the best source for vitamin D. So things like salmon, tuna, sardines, mackerel, herring, egg yolks have some vitamin D in them. Now, we're starting to see more products where they're adding vitamin D to them. Okay, so usually regular milk, liquid milk has it in it. But if you're drinking oat milk or soy milk, you have to check and make sure they're adding it to it if you're using your food as your source of vitamin D. And you have to really read those labels carefully. Sometimes they're adding it to orange juice as well, and sometimes they'll add it to breakfast cereals, like I was mentioning the Total brand before. Another place that you can also get it is if you put your mushrooms out in the sun. And I know this sounds very strange, but it's really true. Take your container of mushrooms. I think it's a good idea to spread them out a little bit so that they're exposed to the sun. Stick them out in the sun, and they say about a half an hour, you'll develop some vitamin D in there. It's the only non-animal source of vitamin D. So it's kind of interesting. How much do you need? Well, this is one case for getting older, you do need a little bit more. So when we look at the amounts that you might need, they're now doing vitamin D in microgram levels. So if you're under 70, you need about 15 micrograms. If you're over 70, you need about 20. So this can be something too that you'll see in a senior vitamin versus just a regular adult vitamin. And notice here too that it's on our food labels. So as I mentioned before, if you go down to the bottom of the food labels, vitamin D is on there. And that is only in the last 3 years that it's been included. They started including it because so many Americans are low. About 30% of Americans are low in vitamin D. And so this is why it's kind of one of those very common deficiencies, and why I, suggest to people that they get their level tested. So how can you get a little more vitamin D? Just from food, instead of having a turkey sandwich, how about having a tuna fish sandwich, or use some canned salmon, or use the tuna and the salmon in the pouches, or have any of those fish at dinner. And if you're not a big fishy fish person like me, over at Trader Joe's, they have very nice baked cod that's very plain. It's not too fishy. So you might like that. And remember that albacore tuna is less fishy tasting than the chunk light. So some people enjoy that more. You can also use regular milk, and I would suggest skim or low fat for vitamin D, or you can also use unsweetened soy milk or pea protein milk. Those of you who come to my classes know I'm not a fan of almond milk or oat milk because they're not very high in protein, and they generally don't have a lot of good extra things added to them. And sometimes they have sugar added to them as well. Now, if you're going to take a vitamin D supplement, your doctor wants you to take it, make sure you take it at a meal with some fat in it, because as a fat-soluble vitamin, it will be better absorbed. I also make that recommendation to people if you're taking a multivitamin. Take it at a meal where you're having a little bit of oil in your salad dressing, or you're having some nuts or some avocado or some meat or some egg yolks, cheese, where you're getting some fat, because that will help that vitamin D get absorbed better. I've got my little tip there for the mushrooms there, and how you can put them out in the sun. And this is one instance where you do not want to get too high in your vitamin D. So let's say you're very low and your doctor puts you on a very high dose. They usually will ask you to come back in a few months and they want to test your blood again and see if your vitamin D levels come up. If it's come up, they're going to tell you, please don't keep taking that super high dose, because some research has shown that very high doses of vitamin D can actually work against strong bones. So we don't want to have too much. So always remember, if your doctor puts you on vitamin D, a very high dose, please make sure you follow up with them and get that blood work done later on. Let me just stop and see, does anyone have any questions about vitamin A or vitamin D before we go on? Let me see if I can see the chat. Let me see if I can see what people are putting in there.
I was going to ask Pat,
Yes.
as far as, some of the canned tuna and salmon and even canned beans, you just hear about the quality and the cans of, and I know
Right.
that like the BPA lining and things has changed, but I mean, is there more benefits to still eating tuna?
Oh,
Or
yeah.
should you go with like the packages that's in the plastic instead of the cans? Or
Right. I understand. Yeah, there has been concern about the BPA that's in the lining of cans. And some companies have moved to alternatives to that. I haven't seen any research to say the alternatives are much better. I think that as long as you're not eating it all the time, it's probably fine. I have just recently become a fan of cooking beans from the bag, because I find that you get so much more and you can really make them softer when you cook them yourself versus getting them out of the can. But most people are using, that kind of thing. They're using their beans from cans and that. I think as long as you're not doing it for every single day, something in the can, it's probably fine. It's more of a concern for growing children, because those, there might be some effect on hormone levels in the developing children. So I'm not as concerned for adults, but I do think that I try to do more of a variety of things. So let's say maybe you get some things in pouches and some things in cans, because the more I keep reading about all these different, ways of preserving things, there's always something in everything. And so this way, the more diversity you have is always better. The same thing with food. It's always good to have a variety of different foods. But I think, and I think it's fine, like with the tuna and things like that, fresh fish can be really tricky for some people because you really have to use it up quickly and it tends to be very expensive, so I'm more inclined to wait for that great albacore tuna to go on sale and buy a bunch of those and keep them around. So I'm not too worried as long as people aren't just living out of cans, in terms of their food.
yes, I agree. As far as making your own beans, you do get so many, so much more for the price of the bag of dried beans, and having an Instapot really helps. I don't know if that's how you do yours, but some veggie broth and a bag of black beans, and 20 minutes, you're good to go.
Yeah, it's amazing. And it really does help for those of you who suffer from gas, from beans. You can cook them longer and make them softer. I recently took a can of chickpeas and I rinsed them and I put them in a pot, covered them with water, and I brought it to a boil, and then I turned down to a simmer and I simmered them for another half an hour, and they were so much softer, the canned beans. So even if you don't want to cook from scratch, if you suffer from, excessive amounts of gas from beans and it's uncomfortable, that can be one way to make them a little bit softer and more tolerated. But yeah, they really are the magic food, I have to say, in terms of price and what you get, for your money. You cannot go wrong with legumes and all the beans. And we've done a whole lot of those types of things in the plant forward nutrition class, which is actually coming up this Thursday. So if anyone wants to join us, it's at 12:30. So any other questions? I can't really see this.
Hi, this is Angela.
Yeah, hey.
Is there a number of carrots you can juice, like to get the sufficient amount?
Right. Well, the interesting thing is that if you do too many carrots, your palms are going to turn orange. That's what happens when you have a lot of carotenoids in your diet. they tend to get stored in the little fat pads of the palms of your hands and your feet. So I'm not worried about it being too much for people, but I always think it's probably better not to, not to overdo it. Just in general, I think if you're making a juice, I would say, if it's for one person, probably 2 large carrots would be it. There's a decent amount of natural sugar in carrots compared to other fruits, so I think that would probably be what I would put as my limit. And just watch your hands and see what happens. And if you start looking a little orange,
Okay.
then back away.
Thanks.
Yes, sure. Anybody else? You doing okay? All right. Well, let's talk about vitamin E. And a lot of people don't realize that this is a very common deficiency. It is fat soluble, just like vitamin A and vitamin D. And we do see research coming, in and out about heart disease and it being healthy and helping us fight heart disease. It's a very good antioxidant to protect the outer layer of all your cells. And so it's very good for helping fight infections as well. Most of it's coming in the American diet from nuts and seeds and oils. And even avocados will give you some. So a lot of people who may not be eating a lot of nuts or seeds, they may really not be getting any vitamin E. And so we don't need a whole lot, just about 15 milligrams a day. Most multivitamins will have, what you might need in there, but you could easily do it by eating nuts, eating seeds like sesame seeds, sunflower seeds, flax seeds, chia seeds as well. Flax seeds, I probably would say I'd want them to be ground up to be able to really access the vitamin E in the middle. It's the same thing like with omega-3 fats. The flax seeds themselves really need to be broken up. Otherwise, if you've ever put them in liquid, you see they form a little gel around them. And so you really don't access the nutrients that are in it that well. And then of course, salad dressings that are based on oil rather than, mayonnaise are going to be better sources. Any kind of oil as well in avocados. So very good ways to get it. And, we all want a little salad dressing on our salad, so it's a good thing to do. I'm always a big fan of people, if you don't have an allergy to tree nuts, to enjoy nuts, and they are very, very good for you. And you're going to see when I talk about selenium, that's one of the best places to get it. And so I try to include a variety of nuts in my diet. Because I'm an older woman, I can only eat about 1,600 calories a day before I'll start gaining weight because our metabolism's a little slower as we get older. So I usually eat a half a serving. So whatever it says on that container, if it says that 28 almonds is a serving, then I'll eat half of that. Okay. If you're trying to gain weight, nuts are a good way to gain weight. You can eat, more than 1 or 2 servings. But you can also enjoy peanut butter, almond butter on sandwiches. Put some nuts in your oatmeal, yogurt. I put my ground flaxseed on my cereal and in my pancakes. I even sprinkle it on my peanut butter sandwich before I close it up. I always try to have a little bit of salad dressing with my salad. And here's a good little tip. If you have kids who won't go near salad, here's a really easy thing to do. Just put like a teaspoon of raisins or a teaspoon of dried blueberries, some kind of little dried fruit on it, and I guarantee you they'll eat it because that little bit of sweetness is just a really nice balance to the other things in there. Also too, I do really like canola oil, but really all oils are going to be good sources of vitamin E, but canola is the best profile for those omega-3 fats that we all tend to be a little bit low in. Olive oil is very good for you as well, but it's really the type of phytochemicals that are in it, not the type of fat that we need. So we don't actually need the type of oil that's in olive oil. Our body can manufacture it. So that's why I like canola. And you can use organic if you're worried about genetically modified canola, in the oil. And then avocado is good too. Just be careful with those because they are very high in fat. So you can have 1 or 2 slices, but don't eat a half an avocado unless you're trying to gain weight. Then that's okay. Now, vitamin C, this is the one. I just saw someone last week, and this gentleman was taking 2,000 milligrams of vitamin C. He had a whole host of different supplements he was taking. And as I asked him, why are you taking this? He's like, I'm not really sure. I think I read something or I heard something. And I And this poor guy was having a lot of diarrhea. And the first thing I said to him is, vitamin C over about 1,000 milligrams a day can give you diarrhea. So please stop that vitamin C. We only need about 60 milligrams a day. Loading up on 1,000 milligrams a day is probably not a great idea. We like in America to get vitamin C. We like our orange juice and our oranges and all our citrus things, our grapefruit, but we can get it also from peppers and broccoli and potatoes, believe it or not, and even cabbage. So as we move into the fall and we're enjoying our cabbage dishes, we're getting vitamin C. Tomatoes also has some vitamin C. Strawberries are a great source, as are Brussels sprouts. So lots of delicious ways to get it. And I do think that this is one area where we can definitely easily get it from the food. We don't really need to be getting it from supplements. If you get it in your supplement, it's okay, as long as it's not a super high dose. So like when you're looking at your vitamin label, and it may say that it has, 1,000 milligrams in there or 500 milligrams, that's too much, okay? If it had 100 or around there, that's okay. But you really don't need to be loading up on it. This might be a little technical, but let me explain that vitamin C is what we call a water-soluble vitamin. So that kind of vitamin includes vitamin C, all the B vitamins, so B1, 2, 3, all of those, biotin, B12, all of those. Those are the water-soluble vitamins. So they are not stored to any great extent in the body. So we do need to replenish these and make sure we're eating well to get a variety of these different water-soluble vitamins. They also tend to be a little bit more fragile than the fat-soluble vitamins. So we need to handle these foods with a little more care. So with your strawberries, I always say to people, don't rinse them and then put them away in your refrigerator. Wait till right before you're going to enjoy them and then rinse them. Because when you expose water-soluble vitamins to water or to light or to heat, you start losing them. So it's better to kind of wait to, wash them or to cut them even, so that way we're not exposing more surface area to oxidizing process. And even heating, quick cooking methods are always the best for preserving these more water-soluble vitamins. So things like microwave, stir frying, even steaming are great methods. Boiling is not a great method, because think about it, you're putting in all that water, and then unless you're going to drink that water or use it to make soup or something, you're going to lose a lot of the vitamins in that water. So what's required for each day? About 75 milligrams for women and about 90 for men. Believe it or not, smokers need an extra 35 milligrams a day. So if you have someone in your life who smokes, they should be getting a little bit more vitamin C and making sure that they drink some, orange juice and have some of these vegetables with the vitamin C in them. So here's some of the things I was just mentioning about preparing things with vitamin C and other water-soluble vitamins. Also, keep them in airtight containers. Okay, so let's say you're finishing up your quart-sized thing of orange juice. You only have a little left, and you're annoyed that it's taking up so much room in your refrigerator. And you pour it into a little cup and you stick it in the fridge. Well, because it's exposed to the air, you're losing some of that vitamin C. So by the time you go to drink it the next day, you might have lost a lot of that vitamin C. So always cover things and make sure that it's airtight. So this way you're not exposing your food and losing the vitamin C. Also to enjoy some of the citrus as we move into this cold season. Enjoy some of those tangerines, clementines, easy things to peel and enjoy. Enjoy some of those peppers as well. I love tomatoes too. Those little tomatoes are great sources of vitamin C. Cabbage, broccoli, coleslaw, Brussels sprouts, all great ways to get vitamin C. And also too, with your potatoes, again, try not to boil them in too much water. And if you are cooking your potatoes in, let's say you are going to boil them, save that water and use it next time to make some soup with it. And that's assuming you're using organic potatoes. Okay, potatoes are one of those things that tend to be on those dirty dozen lists in terms of pesticides and herbicides. So I do recommend it if you can use organic potatoes when you're cooking, especially if you're going to eat the skins, which is always a good idea. And there's my little tip about the berries as well. So any questions about that one before we go on? Now zinc. I know you've seen these commercials where they have the people and they're taking these things with zinc in them to help their immune system. And yes, zinc is important for the immune system. It's part of about 100 different enzymes in the body. And we have to have some of it because the body does not store it in any large amounts. Protein foods generally contain zinc. So you can imagine I'm a little worried about my vegan friends, right? Are they getting enough zinc? And you're going to see why I'm also concerned about them in a minute. Zinc is also something that when COVID hit, people all started running to the store and grabbing it because there was a little research to show that it seemed to be helpful for respiratory infections. But the problem was they may have been taking too much, right? We don't need to overload our systems. And again, this is one of those places where you're going to see zinc in your multivitamins. So I almost guarantee you do not need to take an extra zinc on top of that. Here are the good food sources. So you will see all the different meats that it's in. It's in many types of shellfish, lots of beans. So those vegans can use beans and nuts and seeds. It's also in milk and cheese. So vegetarians can get it from there. Oatmeal is a good source as well. And many times it's added to breakfast cereals as well and bread. So sometimes you'll see it in there. We need about 8 milligrams for ladies and 11 milligrams for men. But vegans who aren't doing any animal products or any, milk and cheese, as well as no meat or fish, they may need up to 50% more. And the reason is that some of the things that are in plant foods can bind up the zinc. So this may be why you're hearing that it's a good idea to soak your nuts, right, before you eat them. All right, and a lot of vegan recipes, it's interesting, they'll have them soak cashews and things like that before they blend them into sauces. It's a good idea because it makes the zinc more absorbable in the body. Also, too, sprouting grains. So if you go to the health food store and they have a sprouted grain bread, you're going to get a little more zinc out of that bread than you would have, a regular type of bread that isn't sprouted. And also too, if you soak your beans and whole grains in water for a few hours, that can also help liberate the zinc. So it's just interesting that we run into this sometimes with zinc. Now, the next one is something that I really do not want you to. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
Can I ask a quick question about zinc?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm just wondering because I went and got this out of my cabinet. I was thinking how much, because 8 milligrams and 11 milligrams doesn't seem like very much zinc. And so, I mean, just one of the tablets that I have is 50 milligrams.
Exactly, right. And I bet, do you have a multi too that you take?
I don't actually. I do a green smoothie thing.
Okay.
But so that's kind of my multi. But I mean, is zinc one of those that our body will, release the excess, or is it really detrimental to have?
Right. Zinc is not as bad as some of the other ones. And you're going to see a chart, and I put my cautions in there, like the things. Zinc potentially could influence magnesium and calcium because they're all the minerals that kind of compete for absorption. So that's part of it when we worry about when people overdose on one thing or have too much of one particular mineral. It may not allow some of the other minerals to get into the same type of receptors. So what I would do if I were you is I would cut it in half. Get a pill cutter from the pharmacy, just cut them in half. And if you want to use it, but I don't think if you're eating meat in your diet or any of those things that I listed that are good sources of zinc, you don't necessarily need to be taking that high a dose or even 25 milligrams a day, So yeah, but it is interesting. Yeah, and it's surprising sometimes when you see, and one of the biggest ones that I see that a lot of women take is biotin. And a lot of women are taking super high doses of biotin. And it's not a great idea because it can actually throw off the lab tests for thyroid disease. And so a lot of women have low thyroid, and you may be taking a lot of biotin, and it might be messing up the accuracy of those thyroid tests. And there's no solid evidence to show it helps with hair. I know everyone's trying to do it for hair and hair regrowth and that, but there's really nothing yet to say, yes, this is really useful for it. And I'll mention that too. We'll get down there in a little bit, but that's just something about that. Okay, so I'm going to scoot down. I think we just have selenium, and then we'll get to that big chart and the little guidelines at the end. So selenium, this one you read about being very good to help fight cancer, but it also can actually be detrimental in too high doses. So I really want you to check if you're taking a multivitamin, how much are you getting of selenium? Okay, because sometimes it's just too much, and over 400 micrograms of selenium. Notice micrograms is very, very tiny. So we really don't need very large doses of this, but over 400 micrograms can interfere with certain medications. So this is why it's important. Interestingly, there's a study I put on this page that they did a study during COVID about selenium, and they found that people who had adequate selenium had better rates of surviving COVID. And the way that they found their selenium level was through their hair, because they can take a sample of your hair and see how much selenium you've been eating. Sometimes you'll see research studies where they take people's toenails and you can see some of the deposits of these different trace minerals in the toenails as well. So it's just kind of a funny thing. So where are you getting your selenium? Nuts. Okay, now I see a lot of cancer survivors running to the store and buying tons of Brazil nuts. Brazil nuts are very, I'm sorry?
I'm sorry, Pat, what was that number you said, or the amount?
Yeah, don't go above well, we don't want you to even be close to the 400 micrograms. Above that, it can start to interfere with some of your medicine. But some of the Brazil nuts, you only need 55 micrograms a day. And so if your supplement, like I have seen supplements that give you 300-400 micrograms, that's really too much. And especially if you're eating these foods here that a lot of us are eating, pork, turkey, chicken, fish, eggs, whole grains, these are all going to be sources of selenium too. Brazil nuts, though, are particularly high in the selenium. I think, if I'm remembering correctly, I think they had about 100 micrograms per nut or per 3 nuts. So just be extra cautious about that. I did give you a little link here to a PDF that shows you all the selenium in different foods, and on there it would have the Brazil nuts, so you can double check on it. And any of the research that I've mentioned in this packet, you can also see the actual research that I cited. Okay, so if you want to read about that later on. But I put together this chart for a class I did last year at Levine, and I've added some new things to it, just about all the different, it goes step by step. I'm not going to go over it all with you right now. I'll just mention a few things, but I thought you might like to have it. It shows you what is either the recommended dietary allowance or the adequate intake. Adequate intake is just a level that the researchers put together when they don't have a ton of science yet. It's kind of like their best estimate. The daily value is what they use on food labels. Okay, so that's just why I just included both of those things. And then all the way on the right, this is where I really want you to pay attention. This is what's called the upper tolerable limit. This is the highest amount you can take without developing problems. Okay, it's not a recommended amount. The recommended amounts are in the first column there. Okay, but this is like, please don't go up that way. It's too much. We don't want to get into a territory where we're running into problems. But I do want to mention, because I know a lot of women are taking calcium, because sometimes it's very hard to get enough calcium. If you're a woman under 50 or 50 or below, you need about 1,000 milligrams. And if you're over 50 and you're not taking hormone replacement therapy, you need 1,200 milligrams. Okay, so that's the recommended amount. Most of us are not doing enough from our dairy products or the rest of our foods that might give us calcium. So if you are taking a calcium supplement, the easiest one to absorb is calcium citrate. And do not, though, take more than, say, 500 to 600 milligrams at one time, right? The reason is you can't absorb more than that. We don't want to run into interference with other, nutrients, other minerals. And there is a little bit of research to show that if you have coronary artery disease, if we take very high doses of calcium at once, say like 1,000 milligrams, it may get deposited in those coronary arteries, and we don't want that. So I put some little cautions in there. And the B vitamins, you know, you'll see lots of different ones coming up in a minute, but choline is one that we don't hear a lot about. We get it mostly from egg yolks, so that's some interesting place. Chromium is sometimes used to help with blood sugar control, but copper, okay? So here's an instance where excessive doses of copper can interfere with zinc. So Carrie, with you, if you were eating a super high copper diet and not having any meat, you know, then you might need, you know, a little bit more zinc in the diet, right? But most of us are eating, you know, we're not eating a ton of copper. It generally comes from like chickpeas, some of the nuts and things like that. And then down here, I just want to point out about iron, okay? Iron can be very constipating. So if your doctor ever tells you you need to take an iron pill, sometimes the time release ones are better because they aren't as constipated. Also too, we don't need as much as we get older. So notice that the numbers go down. Notice that men in general need less than women because men don't have their periods. They don't have periods at all. So they're not losing blood every month. And most men I know love their meat. So they're eating tons and tons of red meat. But the ladies, we tend to not eat quite as much. And with menstrual cycles, we lose the iron. And then magnesium. This is one that people are deficient in, many Americans. And magnesium is found mainly in like whole grains and beans, things like that. It's very relaxing. So sometimes you'll see it in pills with calcium. That's fine to do. But don't go over 350 milligrams a day from pills or from like if it's added to a cereal or something. We don't want to start interfering with other things. But magnesium too is something that sometimes helps people with constipation. So again, that sometimes people will do a little bit with that. Down here, I'm not going to talk about all these things because I know I'm running out of time, but just a few things, just reminders, just again with the selenium, we have seen, you know, if you don't have enough, it increases the risk for cancers. There's some concern about having too much in the diet and the risk for developing certain cancers. So make sure your multi doesn't contain too much. Salt wise, we really don't need much in our diet. We never need to take salt pills unless your doctor prescribes it. But so I put a little reminder in there. The B vitamins we tend to do pretty well on. But this is where sometimes medications can interfere. So sometimes you may see someone may be taking oral contraceptives, which can lower vitamin B6, right? So this is again why I say it's a good idea to talk with your pharmacist and say, I'm taking this, should I be doing a multivitamin just to make sure I'm getting enough of this particular vitamin or mineral. Now here's my little reminder about the biotin. So you only need 30 micrograms a day. Taking more than that is not going to make your hair grow. I wish I could say it does. Mainly with hair, a lot of it is genetic, and as we get older, you know, unfortunately, we tend to get more hair loss, especially towards the front, thinning. Protein is essential. Vitamin C would be essential. Having adequate amount of just good nutrition is essential for hair growth. But a lot of it, you know, is kind of out of our hands. Hormones come into play as well. And so I wish I could say it works, but I haven't seen anything yet to really say that it does. And so down here too, I've got a little bit about B12. This is where I get nervous with the vegans. Okay, so B12 is only found in animal foods. So if you are not eating any of them, you have to make sure you're getting it either from a supplement or, you know, like a multivitamin, or from a B12 fortified food, something like nutritional yeast. So if you're vegan, make sure you're getting some in your diet. You need about 2.4 micrograms per day. As I mentioned earlier, vitamin C can interfere with copper. Okay, so don't go too high in that. Vitamin D, I put some of the reminders we talked about already in there. And it is associated when you're very low in vitamin D with an increased risk for developing cancer, also developing autoimmune diseases. So this is why I think it's important to make sure you're adequate in there. And then just a little reminder there about the zinc as well. So I'll just wrap it up because I know we're running out of time for some good tips about multivitamins. Okay, so always tell your doctor what you're taking. If they forget to ask, or if you're filling out that intake form, put down what you're taking, the brand, how many you're taking, you know, each day. Put down your herbs, let them know, because there may be something you need to know about. Talk to your pharmacist, ask about any potential interactions with vitamins and your medications. Vitamin K is not recommended for people on some of the blood thinning medications. We also know that some thyroid medications need to be taken away from minerals because it can bind up the absorption. And we also know that sometimes taking vitamins or taking a particular medicine for a very long time may lead to deficiency. So you need to know about that too. But if you are going to take a multivitamin, pick one for your gender and your age. So it's either going to be an adult vitamin if you're under 50, or a senior vitamin if you're over 50, and then for a man or a woman. And that can be a good, more pinpointed type of supplement for you. But don't take vitamins with excessive amounts of the daily value. So when you look at them, you'll see it's going to tell you what percentage do I have of different things. And you can see that some things like the selenium, I am concerned about. I may be okay if you have a little bit more vitamin C in there because that's water soluble, right? It's going to pass through. But certain things you want to make sure you're not doing too much of. And particularly pay attention if you're doing a multi and you're also doing a separate supplement, and you're doing like protein shakes or ensures and things like that.
Pat, can I ask
Yes.
a question about
Sure,
that?
sure.
So if there is a woman that has gone through a hysterectomy at a younger age, or is in menopause due to treatment, would that then move her kind of age of supplements that she should look to getting something?
That's a great question. And I've never thought about that before, but it would not. And the reason is, well, it might in terms of the iron. She wouldn't need as much iron if she's not having her period. But the senior vitamins tend to have more vitamin D and more B12, which she might not need. So I think what I would probably want to do is, it would also depend on her diet, right? Because if she's eating a lot of meat, or she eats a lot of beans, she's getting a lot of iron in other ways, that she wouldn't necessarily, need a lot more iron. You know what I mean? So it's kind of complicated.
The calcium was kind of the bone loss.
Right. So, you also brought up another good point. When you look at your multivitamin, you will not see enough calcium for the whole day. And the reason is twofold. One of them is they don't want to put too much calcium in there so it binds up the zinc and the magnesium, right? Like we talked about. But it makes the pills enormous. So they don't put usually more than 300 milligrams in a multivitamin. But yeah, if she was concerned about her bones, and first thing I would say to her is I probably would make sure that I have some soy, okay? Because the natural phytoestrogens in soy have been showing up as something that can be helpful in blocking estrogen that the body might still be making from the fat stores, right? Before menopause, it's your estrogens made mainly from your ovaries. But after menopause, and probably in that woman's case, it's made from her fat stores. Mm-hmm. So, if she has a lot of extra fat stores, then she probably is still making estrogen enough that, I'm not as worried about her bones. But let's say she's a really skinny lady and she doesn't have a lot of fat on her, then I would probably want to make sure she's getting enough soy in her diet to help, just to help with those phytoestrogens, because there does seem to be some evidence that it's beneficial. The other thing is the phytoestrogens actually block the receptors for the estrogen. So the overall level is lower in people who are consuming soy. I know in the past, soy used to be taboo for anyone who had breast cancer, with the hormone sensitive type. But now the current recommendation is enjoy it. It's okay to have several servings a day. Just make sure it's a whole soy food, like soy milk, tofu, edamame, good solid forms, not like soy pills or soy protein shakes. So I hope that answers your question. Also, let me share with you a really interesting article I just had in one of the classes this week. They found that Jarlsberg cheese was really good for people's bones. And it seems to be the bacteria that's used when they ferment the cheese, because it's a type of Swiss cheese, so it has the holes in it. So there's a very good low-fat Jarlsberg cheese at Trader Joe's. And they also have it sometimes at Costco, and they have it sometimes at Harris Teeter in the deli section. It's just called Light, Lite, Jarlsberg, which is Jarlsberg. B-E-R-G. So it's just, the Jarlsberg's just a type of cheese, but I always recommend low-fat cheeses, and that one is delicious. So, but it was the bacteria. So the fermented products sometimes can be good for the bones too. They're finding compared to like regular cheese like Camembert.
And I think, Pat, there's also a question in the chat about can you take a multivitamin in the morning and then take a vitamin D and calcium at lunch?
So I would want to know how much vitamin D you're getting in your multi, so that you're not overdoing the vitamin D, because I guarantee you there's vitamin D and calcium in your multi. So just know what you're starting with, okay? You may not need that vitamin D later, right? And you might want to switch if it's a pill that has calcium and D together, you could always switch it out and just get one with calcium alone. But yes, so I was just about to say on here, I always say to people, take your vitamins with food. Don't take them on an empty stomach. Sometimes the B vitamins can make people nauseous, right? If you take it on an empty stomach, you're also not going to get the benefit of some of those vitamins if you take it on an empty stomach. Like, you want something with fat in it. So I like people to take their multivitamin usually at lunch or dinner, because that usually is more fat than breakfast, especially if you're having just a bowl of cereal with like skim milk in it. So I like to do that, have it with something where there's a little bit of fat in the meal. But with your calcium, do not take it along with a multivitamin. Okay, so let's say you want to take 600 milligrams or 500 or 600 milligrams of calcium later in the day, separate it by at least 3 hours. You can take calcium citrate on an empty stomach. That is one that you can. Calcium carbonate you have to take with meals to help. It needs stomach acid to get absorbed. But you can take the calcium citrate without a meal. But don't have it near your multivitamin. The vitamin D, I'm not worried about that with, along with zinc or any of those. That's not going to do anything to it. It's just the calcium. The minerals kind of compete with each other. So those are just a few of the things. And then also too, like I said, please just maybe jot down, go through and look at what you're eating. It's amazing, even vitamin water, you may be having drinks that have lots of things added. People don't realize sometimes. But I didn't mention it before, but vitamin B6 is one that can actually cause damage over like 100 milligrams a day. I see people who take like a B complex and a multivitamin and then eat foods that have B vitamins in them, and they can end up with way too much. So don't take a B complex and a multivitamin. You do not need that. Your multivitamin will certainly have enough of the B vitamins in there. And just, remember that your pills can't replace eating poorly. We really need to eat these foods that are so good for us. And the good thing is those great plant foods, especially, they really help fill us up. So when we're trying to watch our calories and things like that and be healthy, it's a good way to fill up. There's a wonderful website by the National Institute of Health. On this website, I've given you the link to it. You can just click on it. They have probably close to 50 or 60 different fact sheets about all the different multivitamins, individual vitamins and minerals. And then they also have some herb information on there. Very good, solid information. The consumer level is very easy to understand. And then they have a little bit, more scientific one for healthcare professionals, but there's very, very good information for those. So you might, if you are interested in one in particular, it'll give you like even more information on like the different forms of each of the different minerals and that sort of thing, if you'd like. So I know this is a lot, like I always do with my classes, but I hope it helps you. I hope you can see it's more complicated than we realize. And unfortunately, the FDA does not regulate this unless there's a health report that there's a problem. So unless someone's getting sick from something, they don't check these things. So this is why we have to be careful and make sure that we're getting good quality things. The USP on vitamin bottles will tell you that it has been checked by this third party. So if you see USP on there, that's a good indication that it's been checked for it to be dissolvable. Nature Made is a good brand. They have the USP on their products. And I will tell you, just because I know some of you are probably wondering, the Consumer Laboratories did recommend that the Walmart general, all-purpose adult multivitamin was a good one. in their Equate line, which is just their house brand, not expensive. Price does not guarantee, a better product when it comes to vitamins. So,
Thank you, Pat. This
yes,
has been so informative. I appreciate your time this evening.
Sure.
And thank you from Carolina Breast Friends for being
my pleasure.